Welcome back to Risky Business, a show about making better decisions. I'm Maria Konnikova.
And I'm Nate Silver. Today on the show, we'll be talking a little bit of China. How should the second biggest economy in the world respond as the U.S. becomes increasingly geopolitically unstable?
And after that, we will be pivoting to poker and a controversy that happened last week about an incorrect hand winning a pot in a very, very big spot. What should players and others' responsibility be in a situation like that?
Speak up, players. If the dealer fucks up, anyway, we'll get into that in the second segment.
Somebody has opinions. All right, Nate, let's talk about China. So we are taping this on Monday, March 10th. China has just announced retaliatory tariffs on the United States, taking effect immediately, but they will not be affecting goods that arrive in the country before April 12th. Nate, every single time we tape, there seems to be more and more news coming out, but all of it points to one reality, which is that the U.S. is just trying to take a step back from its role in global politics, or rather in its role in building alliances and trying to be a diplomatic force for the good, creating somewhat of a power vacuum. And China, as the world's second largest economy, there are some opportunities here. There's a lot going on between the U.S. and China. I think it would be really interesting to try to, flip the game theory. Last week, I talked about game theory from the U.S. perspective. Let's talk about it from the Chinese perspective and see what this moment in time means for how China should be thinking about its future and constructing its economic and foreign policies. What do we think about this?
China's a real country. They're not this cute little puppy like Canada or something like that. They are the second largest economy in the world, the second largest, effectively military power in the world. They can do a lot of things to contradict United States interest if we're in a zero-sum game on AI and other stuff. And it's a moment for Xi to think big. Because these things that Trump is doing will take a long time to undo, right? If Trump quit tomorrow and went back to Mar-a-Lago and J.D. Vance takes over, then a Democrat wins, I don't know, fucking Gavin Newsom or some shit like that, right? A Democrat wins in 4 years. Even these 6 weeks, right? These 2 months now almost, still would damage America's credibility, I think.
Absolutely. Americans are not happy as, first of all, last week we imposed tariffs on Chinese goods. Means they're going to be more expensive. But now when China is retaliating, it's retaliating very strategically in the areas where it hits the most, right? So it's retaliating against agricultural products. So chicken, wheat, corn, soybeans, pork, beef, fruit, right? That's not good for farmers, not good for commodity prices, not good for any of that. And these tariffs are going to be between 15 and 10%, just depending on what we're talking about. They're also doing more. So China has a lot of levers that it can push. That's not just tariffs. They're also blocking 15 U.S. companies from buying Chinese products. They're just saying, you want to play with us, we'll play with you. And what you have to understand about China is it can actually very strategically can do it can do whatever the fuck it wants, basically. So what they're doing is they're trying to mitigate the effects of some tariffs by saying, oh, okay, fine. The U.S. imposed tariffs on you. Great. We're going to reduce your taxes, right? It can just very surgically say, okay, this company that's now being, subject to tariffs in the U.S. has to pay fewer taxes than it did before so that they can keep their prices the same, right? It can push all of these buttons because it really can have this very directed approach to the economy that even with the executive orders and even with Trump trying to act more autocratically and bypass Congress, we can't do that in the US, right? We don't have that sort of centralized power. And so that is actually something that when you're talking about game theory, who has more muscle, who can push whom around, China can really do things that we cannot do in the United States.
Yeah. And again, in terms of a share of the economy, we went over this last time with Canada and Mexico. No one country is that large a share of the U.S. economy because we make a lot of our own stuff and our imports are diversified. So basically, China, Mexico, Canada and the EU are, treating the EU as one country, are the 4 largest exporters to the U.S., and they're all about equal, about $500 billion per year. But China has a lot of geopolitical influence. The kind of smart foreign policy types I talk to have perpetually been worried about China potentially invading Taiwan. They also have a lot of influence over AI policy. The U.S. is concerned about a potential race with China on AI. But yeah, one thing we're trying to do is prevent China in various ways from getting access to the most powerful semiconductor chips, right? A lot of which are produced, ironically, in Taiwan. And so there are profound geopolitical implications. And China can create a lot more problems for the United States in terms of global alliances and things like that too, especially if Europe is now who are our friends now, Maria? Who still likes us?
No
Who
one.
likes
Oh,
us?
Russia likes us.
I don't want Russia to like us.
Well,
I do not
there's a
want.
difference between what you want and what's happening. So who are our friends right now? Russia likes us. I think North Korea is probably pretty happy with the way things are going. I don't think
Japan. We've left Japan alone, haven't we? I mean, India.
for
We seem to
now.
leave alone.
For now, but we'll see what happens, right? Seriously though, we don't have many allies left. Europe is really up in arms. Literally trying to be up in arms and rearm and trying to figure that out. China is very not happy and is trying to show that, you know what, fuck you, you cannot push us around. And we really can't push China around, by the way. Like, let's just take a step back. This is an incredibly powerful economy. It's an incredibly powerful diplomatic force. If you're thinking about not just the economic stuff, right, but the type of precedent that the US is setting by cozying up to Putin and saying, oh, potentially, like, let's allow Putin to take parts of Ukraine. Like, we don't know what's going to happen with that right now, but that sort of precedent may actually embolden China to try something with Taiwan in a way that it hasn't in the past, because it's been, I think, restrained by some international norms. Those norms might be eroding. So we can potentially see kind of more aggression there. And that's also not a happy place for us to be in, right? When we see that potential. I don't know, right? There's a lot of uncertainty around this, but I think that if international norms of behavior are being eroded, then that can be frightening for a lot of countries in Asia, right? If you think that, oh, okay, this balance of power is no longer going to be held in check, then if I were living anywhere there, I'd be a little nervous.
Yeah, I mean, look, foreign policy did not change that much from Bush to Obama to Trump 1 to Biden, right? And so the United States has lots of problems. It starts stupid wars, right? It has its own economic crises that it then spreads to the rest of the world. But there is more of a consensus on foreign policy than on economic policy or social policy or whatever else, right? It's not even like Trump necessarily has like a coherent foreign policy vision exactly. It's kind of very zero sum mentality. We talked about that before, right?
Yep.
It leans toward isolationism. And look, you'll hear plenty of critiques of Trump on this show. I would rather have Trump err on the side of isolationism than warmongering, if those are the two choices. But when states don't play an active role in the world, then there are power vacuums that could potentially can get filled, right? And by the way, I don't think Biden was particularly effective on China or really anything in foreign policy either, frankly. Trump at least has a little bit of the kind of rogue state factor where you don't know what the United States would do necessarily. But yeah, I mean, look, the stereotype of China is that they're pretty good, I don't know, tacticians, like maybe the global strategy, but they are going to understand if both to secure their own future, or to kind of punch at the United States in a way to slow us down in the AI race too, right? I mean, that's
Oh,
maybe the most high stakes question right now in the world.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that they're very tactically savvy. And it was interesting. I was having a conversation the other week kind of about some of the downstream effects of the Trump policies. And right now, we're seeing absolute chaos, with the NIH and the science funding. A lot of institutions, including places like UPenn, are rescinding offers to grad students in the sciences because they're like, oh, we can't afford you anymore. It's really bad, right? And if you think about what that means for the future of kind of science, technology, scientific development, in the US, there's a potential for brain drain. And people are like, well, where are people going to go? Who's funding it? Like, well, this is pretty funny because I think this is a great strategic opportunity for China to be like me, right? We'll fund it. You come here and you can have a lot of money and you can do your research here. And I actually think that some people might take them up on it. And that would be pretty terrifying, right? If we have a brain drain from the US to China. And that might happen if you cannot get your research funded, if you cannot do work here and someone else. And I say that they might take them up on it because I know people who have gone, to work in the UAE, who have gone to work in a lot of places that like, you would think they would not want to work in because of their ideas about freedom, et cetera, but they do it because they're offered a lot of money, right? And money speaks and incentives speak. And I think that China is very tactically good on all levels of figuring out where the opportunities are, where the potential to get ahead is. And so that, I would not be surprised to see some people, some brain drain potentially happening that way. And that's an interesting thing to consider when we look at, 10 years out, 20 years out, technology and science.
So the counterpart to China being tactically smart is, the strategy in terms of the way it presents itself to, like if I were Xi, I would make Hong Kong, which is controllable because Hong Kong is one city, right? I would make that the most welcoming front imaginable to the West, right?
Yep.
Like as an image play.
That's very smart. Yep.
For right now, China doesn't have the image of luxury that other Asian cultures sometimes do, but this can change,
yeah, and it can change quickly.
Korean goods have become prestigious, right? Obviously, Japanese is a very high prestige country, but but those are countries that are democracies and they have been democracies for a long time, and have like a flourishing artistic center, right? Like I don't, people thought that China would democratize as it became richer, and it kind of mostly has not exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. What can China do to make itself look more appealing to Americans, right? To people who want to flee. And I think that is something that they are potentially not thinking through as deeply as they should. Because to me, great game theoretic move, right, would be, okay, yes, we're sorry, free speech, all this great stuff. We will embrace it, Donald Trump says you can't say these words. You can say anything here, right? Come to Hong Kong. We will give you money. We will give you pretty things. It will be nice. And Hong Kong used to be a place, that was incredibly welcoming before all of the, before there were the crackdowns on free speech and everything that has happened in the last 5 or so years. Hong Kong was a kind of a mecca for a lot of Westerners, right? They went there and they're like, oh, this isn't China. This is different. I think that doubling down on that would actually be huge and would potentially give China an edge in a lot of different things, because you see that they actually can, Australia, right, imports I don't know how many Chinese EVs, right? There are markets where China is actually kind of flourishing in different countries because they have technology that they're able to kind of develop. And I think that if they double down on a lot of these things, we can see kind of a big change in their geopolitical standing and in the way they're perceived in the world, which I think could be a very tactically sound play for them. And we see, and kind of the EV, the reason I mentioned the EVs is because with, tariffs, et cetera, that's actually something that, along with AI, is a place where they can start developing a strategic edge right now, because there is kind of this opening that hasn't existed in the past.
Yeah, but of course, every auto manufacturer, at least the American ones, have like global supply chains, right? So, but yeah, I mean, look, I have friends who are like literally trying to figure out how to make bets on Chinese made EVs gaining market share relative to Tesla. Um, that's the stakes are pretty obvious with with China,
Absolutely.
right?
There's a way forward there where they can actually make their image much more positive for the Western mind than it is right now. And I think that they should really try to be exploring that strategically because there is a vacuum. And the US right now is not looking good, right? The strongman politics are not looking good. It's a great moment for Xi to be like, hey, we're not the strongman. We're not the bad guys. Look at us. Like we can actually be much nicer than what's happening in the United States, and we will not betray our allies or whatever it is. So I think that there's a lot of moves that can happen right now that will not end well for the US.
No, the contrast to the Middle East is interesting is like the marketing strategy, right? In the sense that like the Middle East certain countries will like sponsor huge soccer teams and things like that, right? And they'll have this marketing campaign where, hey, come to Saudi Arabia, and in the pictures we show you in the ads, right, it looks very progressive, and they'll allegedly bribe FIFA to host World Cups, allegedly, and things like that,
Allegedly.
right? But it's a marketing strategy to paint a friendlier face, right? And it probably has worked on some level. I'm not looking at like what American perceptions are of the wealthier, Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, etc. I said Qatar in one of the ways that you're not supposed to say it. There's like 5 ways you can say it, and I just kind of made up my own pronunciation there. Qatar. Anyway,
Guitar is how I say it, but no, I actually I think that that's a good analogy in the sense that foreign image laundering is something that countries have done many times over the years and sometimes successfully. And I think that, and it's always a huge part of any diplomatic policy. It's a huge part of, what the CIA does, right? To try to figure out try to massage perceptions of the United States in different countries. I think it happens all the time. And yeah, when you see an opportunity like that, you should take it. So I think the US should be worried and should try to be figuring out how to make it so that, so that these moves are not going to happen, right? How do you look ahead at the game theoretic board so that you can actually counter these moves before they happen? And that's not something that's happening right now. Nate, let's do a quick recap. So what are our key takeaways from the current situation between the US and China, and kind of where the strategic choices lie?
yeah, I guess a little bit what we talked about before is like the U.S. is abdicating its position in some ways as a global hegemon. I'm using all these terms I learned in debate team years ago. The term that we'd use is soft power, right? Where like the United States is seen as being the most stable economy in the world, a force for stability and international order. Generally, of course, it fucks up and makes some mistakes, right? But an anchor of safety. And if the U.S. is no longer that, then can China play that role? And I think that might actually entail having a friendlier face than China has sometimes, a friendlier face to the West in particular. I mean, Europe is looking around for, hey, who can we trust here anymore? Looking for trade partners potentially. And so it's an interesting moment, right? I think their response is not necessarily to like go, not to get drawn into Trump's zero sum game, which isn't really a zero sum game. I mean, we want global cooperation and all these things ultimately, right? Both China and the US weirdly have like an interest in like making sure that we're the only two AI superpowers, right? And that somebody else, the Middle East, whatever else, doesn't kind of catch up. But yeah, it's a moment for Xi to think big. Um, the U.S. may be abdicating its role as kind of the leader of the free world. Whether China counts as a free world or not is kind of an open question, obviously. But like, you counter sometimes the player who is playing zero sum in the non-zero sum game by being the bigger, better, more mature player yourself, right? And so maybe open up Hong Kong more and don't invade Taiwan until you consolidate kind of more power and more authority. I think playing the long game is almost always beneficial when others are short-sighted.
All right, let's take a break, Nate, and then talk some poker. Nate, have you been on poker Twitter this past week where there has been a lot of controversy, shall we say, around one particular hand that happened at a circuit event? Have you been privy to this, or have you been too busy at the
No,
Sloan conference?
Twitter follows me, although Twitter was down actually for parts of the day. Yeah, why don't you introduce it? I have seen the hand in question. Do you want to introduce this one, then,
Yeah,
Maria?
sure. Okay, so we are at a World Series of Poker circuit event, which is not the main World Series, but this is kind of the circuit gives out rings. It's a big deal. And it's down to the final table. It's down to the final three players. One of those players is Maurice Hawkins, who has at that point 17 rings, I want to say. If he wins this ring, he will tie Ari Engel for the most rings in history in the circuit at 18 rings. By the way, Ari just won another ring. Congratulations, Ari. So Ari's now at 19. But last week he didn't have that ring. And there's a big hand where Maurice and another player are all in. And the dealer fans out the board and mucks the other player's hand and says that Maurice has won with a straight. Maurice is awarded the pot. The other player is eliminated, and Maurice goes on to win his ring, 18, ring number 18. It turns out that the pot was awarded incorrectly. The player who was eliminated had actually had a flush and was supposed to win the hand. This was all captured on camera in the moment. And so there's a lot of controversy around, what went wrong, and also kind of what is the role of the media, right? Because someone was filming this hand. What is the role of onlookers? What role do people have to actually make sure that the pot is awarded to the correct hand? Both hands were on their backs. We can see all cards. You can see what the winning hand is. Somehow the dealer, the other two players, the media, everyone on the rail, nobody speaks up. And this poor kid is eliminated instead of doubling up, potentially changing the outcome. And this is a lot of money, right? We're talking over, this is a difference in payout of over $100,000. This is life-changing money for a lot of people. And so this is a really big spot. This does not happen often, but, how do we think about this and what should be done? And people are incredibly split on this, which actually shocked me.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, has the World Series done anything for him? Like, I would give
No,
him. Okay, yeah.
nothing has been done. It was basically a tough shit, dude. It's your responsibility to protect your hand, and you're done.
Well, first of all, the dealer, it's an all-in pot, right? So both hands are face up for the entire table.
Yes. Yep.
And he mucks a sensible loser's hand really fast, right?
Yes.
Which was just strange, right? There's no reason to
Very
rush him.
strange.
He dealt the whole. So that was one thing. Also, the guy said, "Oh, I thought I won," right?
Yeah, so this is crucial. Yeah, on the video, the person who loses actually says, "Oh, I thought I won," and instead of acknowledging that, the dealer takes his hand, which is still perfectly identifiable, and pushes it into the muck, which is the big pile of cards, which is something that you should absolutely never do.
They have cameras in casinos, so you can always, and there are sometimes circumstances where if one player thinks a few chips are missing, they can pause the entire table, if not the entire tournament, for long periods of time sometimes. So it was very weird. And also, like, my experience has been that, like, especially in the 4 card games, that players like actually go out of their way to point out errors when it's not in their best interest to do so, right? Especially, I mean, like, the thing I'm thinking about is like kind of like, early in the World Series where the dealers are very new and not used to dealing. This isn't Hold'em, so I don't know what the dealer's problem is, right? They're dealing all these types of different games. Like, players are acting as like the eyes of the house, right? And go out of their way to like point stuff out. I actually had something work in my favor one time, right? Where like I was playing Omaha, 8, which is a high-low game. It's a limit game. It's not a all-in game, not a pot limit game, I should say. And like I called with hoping to win the low half of the pot. I had a bad call. I did bad hand, good pot odds, just long cross country, tired, don't play Omaha that much, right? And I don't have the best low. And I'm about to muck my hand, right? But someone says, "Oh, you can't beat, you can't win the high, right? Do you have any pair at all?" And I did win the high. I had a pair of aces and a bad kicker. The other guy busted out on the high, had only a low hand, right? Because my hand was not retrievable in the muck yet, I was able to turn it over. The dealer had not mucked quickly enough, right? But the point is, even then, people are saying, okay, just make sure you didn't do something stupid.
Yep.
And give away like half the pot, right? And so it's very odd that like nobody else at the table said anything. I have had 1 or 2 times where it's like, the bystander effect. I'm sure you've heard of or written about, Maria, but like it's where you assume everyone else is doing something. I've had that happen like once or twice where it's like, did you miss that straight on the board, right? And no one else is saying anything, and everyone kind of like picks themselves into saying, okay, well, if it sure looks like there's a straight on the board, right?
Right.
But no one else is saying anything, so I won't say anything. But it's very bizarre that like a bunch of things that don't usually happen, the dealer has to make this mistake. The player has to be like, how are you not like sweating this hand, right? I mean, there are weird ways. We need to get more detail about like under what circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely.
But like.
Yeah, so I think kind of from a broader perspective, I think there are a few things going on here. So first, like in terms of decision making, right? This is, I think we should point out that this is a much higher emotion kind of and hotter situation than normal, right? This isn't a normal poker hand. This is the final 3 players in a huge tournament for a ring, right? So emotions are running high and people are much more kind of in the moment. This is much more consequential, right, than if this had been an all-in the day before, right, with 30 players left, 300 players left, however many. So that means 2 things for decision-making. First, your decision-making does get worse in those moments. But secondly, because the kind of the risk-reward is so much higher and the consequences are so much higher and the payoffs matter so much more, you should be, it's in those moments where you need to kind of be paying the most attention. And so I think that we have kind of that sort of dynamic here where I think that the player who busted, he did say, I think I won, but then he didn't insist on it because I think that he's flustered, right? He just busted this tournament in this big spot and he doesn't want to look dumb. He doesn't want to be like, no, I think I won, and then realize that he didn't actually win. And he, I think that all of these things, all of these emotional things are clouding the moment. But I think that the other part of this, and the reason that I was really interested in this, because as you know, I'm writing a book about cheating, is kind of what is the responsibility of different people in this hand. And obviously, like ultimately the mistake is absolutely the dealers, right? And the players, but the dealers, the speed of mucking was huge. But is it, people were incredibly torn. And to me, this is the interesting part on whether the media should have spoken up, right? Or whether they should have been bystanders. And I was shocked at how many people are like, no, they should absolutely not be they should absolutely not speak up. They should not insert themselves into the story. I'm like, are you kidding me? Right? As someone who is a member of the media, who's been trained, to not be part of the story, that completely goes out the window when it becomes an ethical issue, right? So we are trained. You do not become part of the story. But if you see that someone got stabbed, you call 911, right? You don't say, "Oh, I'm just observing. Sorry."
Yeah, it's a prime directive of Star Trek. Like it's not a rule. The prime directive, I don't know. I'm not as much of this, but like you're not allowed to interfere in a primitive alien culture, right? There's no rule like that in the poker book.
No, they're absolutely.
The rule is that cards speak, right?
Cards speak, yes.
And cards are face up in the sand. It's not a case where somebody incorrectly mucked, then you can't do anything about it, right?
Yeah. This is a case where both hands are tabled. And so I think it's absolutely the ethical responsibility of someone who notices it to speak up. Let me give a less extreme example. Like imagine, Nate, I'm set on a beat to cover life in Central Park, right, in New York. So I'm there kind of observing and I'm writing about this, right? I'm not going to interfere because I'm just watching people. And then I see someone's wallet get swiped. do I not say anything? Right? because the person didn't notice and they're just standing having a conversation? Or do I say, hey, thief, right? And actually point out that your wallet just got stolen. Of course, I'm going to say something. I'm not going to, even if you're not dying, I'm going to say, hey, someone just stole your wallet, right? Like we need to, this.
I'm trying to think. I mean, like, if I were covering a political campaign and I detected illegal activity, right? I wouldn't tell the police about that. I'd write about it, or I'd choose not to. I don't know. I mean, it's like the analogy, but like, look, I don't.
But that's different. So we're talking about something where you can immediately, right, where you see a crime being committed in the moment and you can immediately do something. If you detected illegal activity in a political campaign, and you had to follow the money, et cetera, you'd report out the story. But if you actually observed something illegal happening that you could change in the moment, I think you would. That's a very different thing.
Okay, let me ask you something. Let's say we are at the World Series this summer, only a couple months away now, and we have made plans to get dinner together. You say I'm at table 612 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Your table's taking a long time to finish its hand. I come over. I notice you fold, right? I notice that then of the two remaining players, the pot is pushed to the wrong player. And I say, not being at your table, wait, that dude just made a flush.
Yeah.
Like, that's okay, right? So it's an immediate thing or like a...
It's absolutely okay. And I also I hate when people start immediately going out to the grander arguments. Well, the media's job is to report. It's not to kind of police the hand. Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. The media's job is to report. I'm not saying it's their responsibility to be paying attention to who's awarded the pot in every single hand. That's not their responsibility, right? Just like it's not my responsibility to walk around Central Park looking to see if there are crimes being committed that I can help. We have police. We have people who do that. But if you happen to see in the moment, and if you happen to know that, then you should absolutely, I think it's your ethical obligation to speak up.
And as part of the poker, again, I go back to these events. The ethic of the community is that like we speak up to dealer errors or errors in terms of how the tournament is run, but especially dealer errors, right? It's a community's responsibility to speak up. And by the way, if you want to talk about like the equilibrium, right? Like if you didn't have people willing to help out a confused dealer, then you would have longer lines because you wouldn't have enough qualified dealers, or maybe they pay dealers more, but then the rake is higher and things like that, right? And so like I think it's kind of like explicitly ethical for a poker player to speak up when dealers make mistakes. Now, what happens if, let's say, come by your table and you've been pushed the hand incorrect? I mean, the thing is too that's weird about it though, like didn't Maurice Hawkins know? You know what I mean? Or,
I'm assuming, like, we don't know, but I'm assuming he did, given how he behaved, because he is someone who always celebrates and is very in your face when he wins. And you see him on the turn, like being like, straight, like, blah, 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 like, I got this. And then on the river, as opposed to celebrating, he just goes quiet. He goes silent. And that is, we don't know this, but I think that, we have a duty to any kind of community that we are a part of, that we love, to kind of keep things above board, right? To keep things, to keep the community good, and to actually like ensure that good behavior is rewarded and bad behavior is punished. And let's just like, if you zoom out even further to journalism, like some of the best journalists have sometimes fucked up, right, and not intervened when they should have, and they were punished for it. I think the kind of the bigger point here is that like we all make poor decisions when we're tired, when emotions are running high, when you're in hot situations, and everyone, you can just not see things that are right in front of your face. Inattentional blindness is a real thing when you're not looking for certain cards, you're not looking for certain things, and you just completely miss it. It can happen to anyone. And just back in December, by the way, I missed a flush that I had. And this was the 10K win main event. This was day 3 or 4. I think it was day 4. Very deep. And, I had gone all in with a pair of queens against a pair of kings. The kings hit a set on the flop. So I was like, I'm dead. Right. And then on the turn, I was drawing to a straight, but I also did not realize that it was another club, and I had the queen of clubs and he did not have the king of clubs. So when the straight didn't hit on the river, I left because I thought I busted. And the player who lost the hand, who had the kings, was like, wait, you have a flush. And the dealer was like, and called me back, right? That's what you do.
I had a spot where
the only ethical way of handling that situation.
At one point I had a lot of chips in one of these Poker Go tournaments, and then lost a big flip, and then didn't have many chips, and then another hand shoved like 15 big blinds from the small blind open shove with like a decent middling strength hand, right? And made trips. I mean, three of a kind queens, but the guy backed into like Broadway straight, so I was kind of pissed and like I just lost this flip and then lost this other thing that wasn't technically a flip, but whatever, right? And I get up to leave, and he's like, "No, dude, that guy only had two bling blinds left, right? He had almost busted in the previous hand and kind of being like tired and like a little, I don't know if it's tilted, but yeah, your attention span can wane in situations like this. This is why it's a bad idea to play 4-card games when you just flew across the country, by the way.
No, I mean, I think that's one of the bigger issues here. Like, we all make mistakes in emotional situations. And so everyone else should, people should try to rectify those mistakes. You should try to be helpful. And that is, I think, something of an ethical obligation that you have.
And also, if don't be afraid to do things that are mildly embarrassing, but that so for example, let's say that I didn't eat breakfast and waiting for the dinner break and I just feel a little shaky or something, right? Like, I'll just verbally start declaring my bets, 5,000 or something, right? Because I don't want any tells having to do with like my hand shaking or things like that. Or like, sometimes you'll see where a player is confused about how to read the board, right? Usually not in Hold'em, but sometimes in Hold'em too. And they'll look at their hand and stare at their hand and try to figure out whether they made something, especially in Omaha games, right? Just table your hand, right? Everybody misreads boards in Omaha, right? You never know when you are missing, like, especially like some bomb pot or something, right? Or a split pot game. Like, you probably made some two pair that you forgot about, if you're playing Big O, 5 cards, right? So just table your fucking hand. It's not that embarrassing. Everyone plays all kind of crap in the Big O games anyway, right? Because you're going to feel a lot worse if you go to bed like, oh shit, I think I actually rivered a backdoor straight kind of thing.
Yeah, no, of course. So I think the big takeaway from this is everyone makes mistakes. It's hard to make decisions when you're tired. Give yourself some slack. Give other people some slack. Don't be afraid of looking dumb, and do speak up, right? Do not let the bystander effect keep you from saying something, because as you get more and more people who say nothing, I think that's the other part of this. There is this tendency to say, "Oh, I must be wrong." Don't succumb to that, and be the one person who says, "Wait, can we just look at this one more time?" And I think that everyone will be better off, whether you're playing poker or in some other situation.
And by the way, this helps the less experienced players that we all want in our game, right? I make far fewer misclicks, meaning when you actually bet the wrong amount, right? Or misread people's stacks, despite the previous example, you just do a lot less of that. Whereas those things are like super fucking stressful to players if they only play live poker like once every now and then, right? And so like again, don't give players strategy, but at least protect errors that the dealer makes. There's other things too, like if dealers are pitching cards too high, right? So you can see maybe the color of the card, right? Like, you should say something.
Yeah. Always speak up.
Right? Like,
always speak up.
Don't be like, "Oh, I'm being rude to this dealer." It's like, no, that's going to create an advantage for players in certain seats, and maybe including you, right? And like, so you should say something.
You should always speak up. If you see something, say something. Brought to you by the New York City Subway.